So we have a layout with a planet placed on it, and it's starting to look pretty good, but we're still missing a couple of things. The most important is we have to identify our planet using a name. And you should have come up with some creative names for your planet, for your planets, your solar system. If you want to use a theme, that's okay. So for example, the theme that I'm going to use is Roman emperors. So I'll name my planets after Roman emperors. So this ringed planet is going to be named Vespasian after a famous Roman emperor. So I need to go to my type tool and click and drag out a text box and type in the planet name and make sure that you change the colors so that you can see it, and make sure it's spelled correctly. And then there's an options menu up here with some character options and some paragraph options. Under paragraph options, we should center it. Yours does not have to be centered, but you want to make sure that you use the paragraph menu to decide what sort of alignment you're going to be using. Then we have the character options, and one of the most basic things that I'm going to do is to change the size. So we can use this character menu to choose a preset size, and our maximum size in that character menu is going to be 72 points. And I'd actually like my name to be larger than that. So I'm going to just hold Shift and Command and then drag from a corner of my text frame, and I can enlarge or resize my text that way. So I want my text to be fairly large so that that's one of the first things that a viewer is going to see, so that I start to create a hierarchy of information where the larger, most prominent text is the most important, the first thing that somebody will read, and then they can dig into some of the longer text. All right, and I think I'm going to change my font. So I have, for my drop cap, I'm using a font called Bodoni, and that is the font that I'd like to use for my planet name. All right, make sure you zoom in or out depending on what you need to do so that it's easy for you to work. And now I have some spacing issues here, so I'm going to make some custom letter spacing. The space between two letters is called kerning, and I think it would be easier to work with my character window. So I'm going to bring that out and look at my kerning control here. I want to change the most obvious thing that I need to adjust is the space between the P and the A, which is way too large. So there are a few presets here that I can use, but even with 100 points negative tracking, I still need to add more. So this is one of those things that you want to really make sure that you're happy with. You don't want to just leave the default spacing, the default letter spacing that Adobe gives you, because it's generally not going to be correct. And I can even join my letters together. So at the bottom of the A and the N, for example, where they are almost touching each other, if I put enough negative kerning on those, they'll actually look visually like they're a single character, and that's called a ligature. And actually, my last three characters are visually connected. They're not physically connected because they're still individual letters, but visually they're connected. All right, so just a few more adjustments here, and I think it'll look okay. This is one of those things that is really something that you need to practice with to get a sense of what looks visually correct to you. It's there's no absolute perfect one-size-fits-all way to do it, but it's up to your judgment as a designer. All right. So I'm pretty happy with that as it is. I might resize it again, make it a little bit larger. For my layout, I want to make sure that it's centered, so I'm just going to, if I drag the left and right ends of the text box to the edges, then I'll know that it's centered on my layout. I want to just check the spacing top and bottom. I don't want to cover my planet. I don't want it to overlap really, because if we imagine this as an educational sort of factual booklet about the solar system, I really want the reader to be able to see an image of the entire planet without any of it being obscured. All right, so there's other things that you could do with this. If you right-click on your text frame and choose Effects, you've got some options here. So maybe I want to put a glow on it. So this is something that you can experiment with. So I'm starting to get a little bit of a glowing effect going on. You can try some of these different blend modes. Some will really have no effect, or you'll lose your effect, and some will add to it. I think for this maybe just normal will work. Play with the opacity, how intense or prominent do you want your effect to be. You can also try to use multiple effects. You could try the feather. You don't want to put you don't want your effects to be so visually overpowering that it's distracting or that it's hard for somebody to read. Subtle is a good way to go. Just enough so that it will give it maybe a unique look, but not so much that it's going to interfere with the readability or detract from it. So yeah, that's a little bit much. So it's just like subtle things. Just 1 pixel on that maybe. Yeah. All right, noise adds a little bit of a grain to the effect so that it's not visually smooth looking. So it can add a little bit of a texture, but mine is so on this, I've only got a feather of 1 pixel, so the noise isn't really that easy to see. So those are some possibilities. Again, this is your layout, this is your concept, so you can experiment with it as much as you want to. I have another planet placed. I've got my first planet, so I'll go over there, and I can do the same thing. So I'll drag out a text box, I'll name this planet after another Roman emperor. Oops. All right, so the names of the planets are a place that you can have a little bit of fun with. So we used a master page, which is basically a template for our entire document. And we want to make sure that we're consistent in the use of repeating elements, such as our header infographic, our page number placement, certain visual elements. But we can vary these up a little bit so that it's not boring and it's not really, really monotonous. We want to make some differences on our pages as well. And we do want to think about what kind of a personality does our planet have? Maybe we want to choose a font that fits that personality. We can custom typeset our planet names. So maybe for this planet, I'll use a completely different font than I used for my original, or for the first one that I worked on with the rings. Maybe I'll match it to, I'm using a font for the rest of the layout called Avenir. Maybe I'll use a variation of that for this planet. All right. So, maybe you want to, let's see, here's my character window. Maybe you want to space your letters out so that you have wide letter spacing. And it gives it a kind of, kind of an expansive personality. Okay, you might want an effect like that, wide letter spacing. Maybe you want much more tight letter spacing. So now I'm working with a setting over here called tracking. So we were working with kerning before, which is adjusting the space between letters. So in order to do that, I had selected between the two letters that I wanted to apply a kerning to, and that's how that worked. But for tracking, we need to select all of our letters, and that will make space between all of them. So either positive space or negative space. So let's try negative 100. And that makes it pretty tight where the letters are starting to overlap each other. And actually, I like that effect for this particular planet. So one of the things you want to guard against if you're doing something like this is you don't want to go too far where you start to lose the shapes of the letters, or that it starts to get a little bit hard to read, like the E and the L are joining together, so maybe there's an H in there, So you just want to, again, do enough where it has the effect that you want, but don't overdo it to where it becomes distracting or it makes it harder to read. So you might need to, with tracking, you might also want to go in and adjust some of the individual letter spaces. So in this case, I think the E and the L are getting a little bit too close together, so I'm going to put some positive tracking on that. There's kind of a little sliver of negative space there that I want to widen. All right, so whatever you think is going to look correct. All right. So again, I think I'm going to resize this, make it a little bit larger. Again, to get that hierarchy of information, some contrast between very large type and then smaller type on my page, which is visually interesting. And again, the way that my layout is, I'm going to center all of my my planet names. All right, you can use the arrow keys to nudge it around. Maybe you want to put an effect on this. I mean, it's something you can experiment with if you'd like. It's not absolutely required. Try a bevel effect, emboss effect. And just experimenting. All right, so maybe something like that looks cool.